Hello, everyone. This is Rosie, and thank you for tuning in to this episode of my podcast called My Intrusive Thoughts. Kia, a 27-year-old girl, sat down with her friend Sarah at their favorite coffee shop, her hands trembling slightly. She took a deep breath and mustered the courage to open up about her deepest fears. Kia, Sarah, I've been feeling really confused lately, and I need to talk to someone I trust. I think I have a problem. Sarah looked at Kia with concern, placing her hand gently on Kia's, offering comfort and support. Sarah to Kia. Kia, I'm here for you. Take your time and tell me what's been going on. What makes you think you have something wrong with you? Kia. Well, it's been happening for a while now. I've noticed these gaps in my memories. Like, there are moments I can't recall, or periods of time that feel completely lost. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I don't recognize the person staring back at me. It's like I'm seeing a stranger. Sarah. That sounds really unsettling. But is there anything else going on? Like something that you would want to tell me? Kia hesitated, unsure of how to articulate her thoughts. She took a sip of her coffee, gathering her courage before continuing. Kia. Yes, there are some things. Lately, I've been having conversations with myself in my head. But it feels like every voice that talks is a different voice. And the way I react to situations, it's as if my emotions can change suddenly and unpredictably. It's like there's different parts of me that are struggling to take control. Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of Kia's words. She maintained her gentle demeanor, allowing Kia to express herself freely. Sarah to Kia. I appreciate you opening up to me about this. It's important to explore these feelings and concerns. While I'm not a mental health professional, I think it would be beneficial for you to seek professional help, and so that you can gain more clarity. Kia. I've been considering that too, Sarah. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but these signs seem to align with dissociative identity disorder. I think I just need to understand myself better and find a way to manage these experiences. Sarah. That's a wise decision, Kia. Professional guidance can help you explore your concerns further, provide you with tools to cope, and offer the necessary support. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. I'll be here for you every step of the way. Kia felt a sense of relief wash over her. Having someone as understanding and supportive as Sarah by her side gave her strength to face the uncertain road ahead. Kia. Thank you, Sarah. Your support means the world to me. I'm going to reach out to a mental health professional and start this process of understanding and healing. I believe that knowledge is power, and with the right guidance, I can navigate this mystery within myself. Sarah smiled warmly, expressing her unwavering support for her friend. Sarah. You're absolutely right, Kia. Remember, you're strong, and together we'll unravel this mystery and find the answers you seek. You're never alone in this journey. Right, so you heard me narrate this dialogue that I came up with, trying to sort of give you an idea as an audience of what D.I.D, that is, dissociative identity disorder, entails. But obviously there's a lot more to it. And in today's episode, we're going to go in depth a little bit from a science student, a med student's perspective, and talk about this disorder and try to demystify it to some degree and debunk some theories and myths that entail and surround it, and talk more about, some other stuff related to it. But also, before I start, I also want to, as always, give you some background of why I'm talking about this, since, it seems a little random, I have not done a proper scientific sort of, episode before. I've done a Victorian era, related to science stuff, before, but not specifically a mental health disorder. And I know that I'm not a professional, but I'm a med student and I've studied about these. And everything that I'm going to be talking about come from verified research. I can say at least that much. But yeah, just a disclaimer that I'm not actually a professional trained to, you know, treat patients or counsel patients. So I can give you a perspective from a med student's point of view and from a science nerd's point of view, talking about the different facts that we know, the research related to it. But if you feel that there is something you want to know more about the treatments or anything, I would suggest that you seek out professionals who are specialized in these subjects. So before I begin, I want to talk about how I basically got around to talking about this or thinking about this and everything. Basically, recently I just watched a K-drama called Kill Me Heal Me that came out in like 2015, I think. It stars Justin Jisung, and he basically plays a character that has D.I.D, that is dissociative identity disorder. And it's a beautiful story, and I think it's one of those few depictions of D.I.D that are true to its actual nature and that go beyond using this disorder as a vice to, further a plot or enhance a character or something. Because a lot of times in mainstream media, the way D.I.D has been sort of portrayed is very, I would say, biased, and kind of people have taken a lot of creative liberty with this, but with that came like this biasness, like this prejudice against, mental disorders that have already existed for a long time. And one of that is that people who have mental disorders are somehow prone to being harmful to society, or being dangerous or being criminals, which is definitely not true. But when you see such things happen in movies and in dramas, your brain kind of starts normalizing this and associating these two things, where, oh, if a person has DID, then for sure they're probably going to have an alter, that's prone to doing criminal activity or something, which actually is wrong. It's a false belief, and this has actually harmed the community that actually suffers with these disorders. And that goes for, I think, all mental health disorders that have been portrayed in such a negative light. So much so that people are afraid to talk about their diagnosis. People are afraid to reach out and ask for help because they're scared to, talk about and open up about their struggles, in case people make fun of them, or people judge them, or people deem them dangerous, or uh, not part of like the society or something. So people have struggled over the years, and I mean, this drama was a very beautiful depiction of how it actually works for a DID patient, and it shows you the struggles that the patient goes. It's like a patient's perspective on this disorder. I really liked it from a medicinal's perspective who has studied DID in detail. And like while I was watching the drama, I got really hooked on to the idea of, figuring out the chemistry and the psychology behind this disorder. Because obviously, whatever we see, the manifestation of the disorder is one thing. But I was more kind of like trying to understand the chemistry, the brain chemistry, the neurology aspect of it, or, the psychology aspect of it, and what exactly happens to the brain and why people develop different personalities. So I did my research, and I was studying this from all sorts of resources, all of the place. I went back to my own books. I checked out the DSM, and then I read some medical journals. I watched videos on YouTube of people who have had the diagnosis for DID, and it's been a whole journey, and it was very informative, and it really opened up a lot of different doors related to this topic for me. And I realized that there is a lot of bias against this disorder, and so much so that there are people who actually think that it's fake and its existence itself is made up, and it doesn't actually exist, and people just do it because they want attention or something, which was ridiculous. Like, that thought itself was so ludicrous, and it reminded me of like times when, people who got fits or epilepsy were thought to be possessed by demons. And I was like, we've literally come so far when it comes to technology, science, and there are still people who want to, trivialize and minimize and invalidate mental health disorders, and literally snub people who are trying to ask for help. Like, it really made me so angry while I was doing my research, because there's a good part of people, like, a good fraction of people on YouTube alone, that is like always ready to start a hate campaign over this. If somebody comes out and they're like, oh, I have the diagnosis for this, they'd be like, oh, you're fake, you're just faking it, you just want attention. And I'm like, wow, like, really, wow. But anyways, it's the era of the online community, and everybody is basically trying to share parts of their lives that normally you would not think of sharing online. But I mean, to each their own. If you are comfortable talking about these things, and I feel like topics like these actually need to be discussed more. They need to be debunked, they need to be demystified for others, so that there's not a taboo around it, so that people are aware, so that people have more knowledge. And if they have more knowledge, I think they would be better judge of character, and of, you know uh they would be more careful with what they say. I mean, you should be careful with what you say regardless, and you should know that literally trying to lynch somebody over a diagnosis, or just, being mean for no reason, just because you don't like what the person is saying, itself is unethical. And what the hell? If you don't have good words to say, just don't say anything. That's my mantra. Okay? If I don't like something, if I don't like a song, if I don't like a movie, I'm not gonna go around and, literally talk shit about it to everybody, and post hate comments, or point it out, like, to other people, or comment on their Instagrams and stuff, and be like, oh, you were so shit in this movie. Like, why do I have to say that? If I don't like it, I don't like it. That's my business, right? I'm just gonna keep that to myself, and there's no point, expressing that and making others feel bad. Just, like, keep it to yourself, okay? The good energy, sure, go ahead, share it with people. You want to compliment someone, go ahead, tell them. But why do you have to hate on other people who you don't even know? So, anyways, I'm starting to rant now before I have even started the episode. So I'm gonna stop here, and let's dive right into the episode. Okay, first off, what is dissociative identity disorder, otherwise known as multiple personality disorder? Well, it is a complex mental health condition characterized by the presence of two or more distinct identities or personality states within an individual. These identities often have unique memories, behaviors, and even physical characteristics. So, naturally, our next question would be, how does someone develop DID? So, the answer is that the exact causes of DID are still kind of being explored, but it is said that it often stems from severe trauma experienced during childhood, such as physical or sexual abuse. The mind uses dissociation, a defense mechanism, to cope with the overwhelming distress caused by the trauma. This results in the creation of separate identities as a way to compartmentalize and protect oneself. Right, so for us to make sense of what dissociation means, we need to look at its definition in the psychological terms, first of all, and then relate it to the disorder and figure out what that means. So, dissociation is a psychological phenomenon that is characterized by a disconnection or disruption in a person's normal cognitive, emotional, or sensory experiences. It involves a temporary and often involuntary detachment from one's surrounding thoughts, feelings, memories, or a sense of identity. During dissociations, individuals may feel as if they're observing themselves from a distance, or they may have a feeling of being disconnected from their body, like, an outer body experience, kind of. And it can manifest in various ways, such as feeling numb, experiencing memory gaps, or having a distorted perception of time. So, this usually occurs in response to severe trauma, such as abuse, accidents, violence, or being a witness to distressing events, as a form for the body to protect itself. Your body literally shuts down, your brain literally shuts down so that you can no longer think of this trauma, process this trauma, or, store this trauma in your head in a way that it's easily accessible to you when it keeps triggering you. So, what the brain does is basically it detaches itself from the reality. And that sounds very, fantastical to listen to or to imagine. But when you look at it from the perspective of somebody going through so much pain, so much trauma, that their brain can literally not handle it, it really makes you stop and reevaluate everything that you know about these disorders. Because it just goes to show that somebody has been put through so much pain, so much trauma, so much distress that their body decided that they can't handle it. And the brain literally ends up making different personalities. It shatters, literally, creates amnesiac barriers between the conscious to store the trauma in different, parts, in the form of different identities, so that the brain cannot access it at the same time and feel that pain or be distressed by it. And it usually occurs in childhood because that is a time where humans don't have enough capability to process trauma a lot. And when children are put through distressing situations that they can't handle, it can usually result in dissociation. And not always, obviously, but sometimes. And this may result. I'm not saying that every time a child is put through distressing events, they will, develop D.I.D. But this is one of the causes that is linked to D.I.D. and its diagnosis. And sadly enough, almost 1% of the global population has D.I.D. See, the thing with D.I.D. is that a lot of times it can go unnoticed because different alters, which are the different identities of a person, we're going to talk about how they're created in a minute, but just wanted to talk about this. A lot of times they get unnoticed because a person may be removed from the trauma or the place where the trauma occurred, and their body may not feel like they need to bring out these personalities and to think of this trauma or get triggered by it. And sometimes when they're put through the distressing situations again, or something triggers them, is the only time when you know when the manifestation of these like personalities show up. So it can go undiagnosed, and also because it has a lot of overlapping symptoms with the BPD, which is bipolar disorder. So sometimes it can be misdiagnosed as well. And it's a very complex disorder, right? Like I talked about earlier. So it takes a very professional, very trained individual to, diagnose this for you. And a lot of times people go through multiple diagnoses. They have to see different people. I'm not saying every time, but it's been more often than not for people to have to struggle a lot to get the diagnosis. Obviously now, in today's time, there has been a lot more work done, and a lot more trained professionals have come out and about, and there's more literature on these disorders, so that it's become more easier to diagnose and to treat these individuals. I do understand that trying to explain this entire disorder and its, psychology and neurobiology and all the aspects would be impossible. So I'm going to try and keep it compact and to the point so that I can, give you some information. And if you're interested, then you can maybe go ahead and research for yourself if you want. So, we're going to talk about the different theoretical and clinical aspects of dissociative identity disorder. But before we begin that, I want to talk about personality development itself. What does that mean in biological terms, and what does that entail exactly? And what happens during dissociative identity to this process? So, personality development is the process by which organized thought and behavior patterns that make up a person's unique personality emerge over time. And they're influenced by genetics, environment, what kind of parenting you've had, and different social variables, meaning what kind of society you grew up in, what kind of country you grew up in, your, traditions and culture and religion, all sorts of different things that makes up your personality. And there have been different, theories by different psychologists that have come up, which basically summarize and kind of explain what happens, and they've all divided them into different stages. For example, we have the Sigmund Freud theory, which is called the theory of the psychosexual development, and we have another one which is called the Erikson stages of psychosocial development. So these are two different things. First of all, the Freud theory basically is based on the idea that the human development is kind of driven by the person's libido. So, what it basically means to say is that the driving force of the personality and behaviors of a human being are libido. So, the stages for the psychosexual development are basically divided into 5 different stages, which is the oral stage, the anal stage, the phallic stage, the latent period, and then the genital stage. And each entails a different aspect of growth in terms of psychosexual development. For example, the oral stage is between birth and 1 year of age, and then the anal stage is 1 year to 3 years of age. The phallic stage is 3 to 6 years of age. Latent period is between 6 to puberty, and then the genital stage, which is puberty till death. Now, it's a very compact, sort of vague compartmentalization of how a person develops related to the sexual development as well as the psychological development that entails with it. For example, let's talk about the third stage of this theory, which is the phallic stage. Now, according to Sigmund Freud, it occurs between the ages of 3 to 6 and is characterized by a focus on the genital area as a source of pleasure. Now, there's different aspects to this stage, right? There's this thing called the Oedipus complex, which according to Freud is where the children experience the unconscious sexual desire towards the parent of the opposite sex. In boys, this is manifested as a sexual attraction to the mother and rivalry with the father, while in girls it is known as the Electra complex, involving attraction to the father and rivalry with the mother. But to further look into this theory, I think it is essential to understand the framework for this theory, which is based on 3 components, which, if you have studied psychology, you would probably already know. I'm talking about the id, the ego, and the superego. So, what are these? According to Freud, there are 3 components to a personality. The id, which is the aspect of the personality present at birth. This is the most primal part of a personality and drives people to fulfill their most basic needs and urges, like, when a baby wants to eat, they cry, when they're hungry, when they're fussy, they squirm, and all the primal, basically, instincts that a child carries at birth are due to the id. And then we have the ego, which is the aspect of personality charged with controlling the urges of the id and forcing it to behave in realistic ways. Now, the superego, which is the final aspect of the personality to develop, and contains all the ideals, morals, and values imbued by the parents, the culture, the society around a person. So these three make up the personality of a person, and how they kind of balance between these three results in the unique characteristics of an individual. So, trying to connect the Oedipus complex with this framework, basically, there is this thing related to this psychosexual theory, which says that as children navigate the Oedipus complex, they experience a process called identification, which is basically that they internalize the values, the attitudes, the moral standards of the same sex parent, leading to the formation of the superego we talked about earlier, which is the moral conscience, basically, you could say. This internalization helps shape the child's gender identity and provides a foundation for moral development. Now, this is all what basically entails the psychosexual development theory of Freud, which, to give him credit, has been used as a basis for different therapeutical conventions. But overall, he was a very, interesting dude, to say the least. And I don't know how much faith we can put in it, but let's just say that these theories have become like a, like a common ground for development of further better theories that have come up recently, and which explain these developments in a more better way. Now, the other theory, which is actually, I think, a more appropriate and more extensive theory that I've come across, is the Erikson stages of psychosocial development. Now, this theory focuses on the social relationships around a human being and how they impact a person's personality development. Now, it has 8 stages, so that's a long, basically, overview, probably, of development, but it's more extensive and it breaks down the whole process into little bits and parts that are easier to understand. And the entire, basically, theory is based on epigenetic principle, which is basically that people grow in a sequence that occurs over time. That is, each stage is like a ladder, supporting and giving way to the next step. In each stage, people are faced with a conflict that serves as a turning point in development, and these conflicts are centered around either developing a and these conflicts are centered around either developing a psychological quality or failing to develop it. For example, uh, there are different stages, right? There's trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame, initiative versus guilt, and so on and so forth. Let's look at one, stage. For example, the intimacy versus isolation stage, which is the 6th stage, and it occurs between the ages of 19 to 40. Now, this is the time when a person, as an adult, is, growing connections and probably entering into relationships and making connections, socializing more. The prime time of an adult in which they are working, they are thinking of starting a family, or they're dating and they're going about and exploring the world. And so the conflict that a person in this stage is going to work on is intimacy versus isolation. So depending on the kind of situation they're in, for example, maybe they're in an abusive relationship, so how do they take that, and how do they come out of it? Do they develop attachment issues? Do they start going for like red flag men? For example, for a woman, if a woman has been in an abusive relationship, and will she develop this like savior syndrome, or will she try to be more intimate? How What would be the outlook for her? Would she be like, would she swear off romantic relationships and would prefer to be single? So this is a conflict, and the result could be either developing a healthy intimate relationship, or being isolated and having trust issues and all of that. So this is one example, and I think this explains or fits in with the literature of DID more, because there is this thing called attachment theory, and which contributes to the understanding of the development of DID, and it examines how disrupted or insecure attachment relationships in early childhood can contribute to dissociative processes. So, like we said, that a big hallmark of DID is a child in their early childhood going through very traumatic, very distressing abuse or violence, or just distressing situations to the point that uh, they're forced to dissociate. Their brains cannot handle the distress, and so this basically develops a kind of mistrust, a kind of fear of maybe adult figures, or maybe caregivers, or anybody that they're close to, and that can have very negative effects on their outlook on life, certainly. So this is how I relate these two things, and I find it interesting how it kind of makes sense. We've already talked about trauma and dissociation, and how the prevailing theory behind the idea is that it's a response to severe and repeated trauma during early childhood. Now, there's another thing called identity fragmentation, which is the basis of it being named dissociative identity disorder, which is formerly known as multiple personality disorder, where it felt like there were multiple personalities within one individual. But in actuality, it is the fragmentation of a person's personality into different parts. So basically, identity fragmentation refers to the division or splitting of a person's sense of self or identity into distinct and separate parts or states. In the context of DID, identity fragmentation manifests as the presence of multiple personalities. These distinct identities, also known as alters or dissociative parts, often have their own unique thoughts, emotions, memories, behaviors, and even physical characteristics. They may differ in age, gender, language, mannerism, and personal preferences. The identities can vary in their awareness of each other and may communicate or interact internally within a system. They call themselves a system. That's how psychologists and therapists usually um, counsel them, by making the patient, the client, understand their personalities as an integrated system, because that's the whole point, right? Because they're not integrated, they're not cohesive. The personality has been fragmented. So the ultimate goal for a therapist is for treating DID is to bring cohesion between these different fragments, and also meanwhile treating the underlying trauma that caused it in the first place. I watched so many different like switch videos and documentaries and interviews of different people who had the ID, and some of them actually switched on camera, and other times they were like people who had recorded themselves switching on camera, and it is intense. It seems fantastical, obviously. The whole idea of dissociative identity disorder is fantastical. It's basically, as a child, you thinking that when you're in a problem, a dragon is gonna come flying to save you. And it makes so much sense when you think that when a child is distressed to the point that they want to not be in the reality that they are in, they start dissociating and they come up with these personalities that are, bigger than them, mightier than them, stronger than them. And there are different, roles of alters in a system. And like I said, a system is basically all these alters within a host body, and they interact and they're basically aware of each other to some extent or not, and different personalities take up different roles to protect the body, the host. And for example, there could be a protector, there could be a persecutor. So different alters may take up different roles, whatever is necessary for the body to survive. So basically, it's the brain, it's the body working on survival instincts, and whatever they can think that may help them survive is what they manifest. So I was like watching this one video of this woman explaining how there might be, you know, non-human alters. People have non-human alters. There are people who may have a snake alter, maybe an alligator alter, maybe a dog alter, maybe, you know, a dragon alter, maybe a mermaid, you know, alter, maybe. And she was trying to explain how the mind of a child works in distress and how that can lead to the creation of these alters. For example, if some child has been subjected to neglect and abuse of the kind where they've been locked up in cages, or they've been force fed dog food, or you know they've been made to share the, you know, wasted food, or they've been made to basically act like a dog or something, their brain might start thinking that, oh, to make sure that I don't get beaten by this person, I don't get abused by this person, I gotta do this. And, you know, in doing so, in performing these horrifying acts, their brain starts to think, oh, this is me. And that fragments a personality. And it sounds heartbreaking to think, but it's real. And there are people who have been through this sort of abuse and it resulted with these sort of alters. And the idea that people would just, you know, literally invalidate or dismiss the entire institution of this, you know, disorder itself is very personal to me for some reason. I don't know, I just get very upset when I read or listen to people say stuff like that. But anyways, that was one aspect. So, for the neurobiological aspect of this disease, there has been a lot of debate and research going on, and scientists have found that there might be a correlation of the workings of the amygdala, which may have some sort of effect on development of and maintenance of this disorder. So, there are some key points that I'm just going to read off real quick. Emotional regulation, as you might probably know. If you don't know, amygdala is a region of the brain which is involved in processing emotions and generating emotional responses. So, in individuals with DID, there may be difficulties in emotion regulation as they may experience intense emotions associated with traumatic experiences or triggers. And dysfunction or alterations in the amygdala's function may contribute to the emotional dysregulation observed in individuals with DID. And also something called trauma and fear conditioning. The amygdala plays a crucial role in fear conditioning, which is the process by which a person learns to associate different stimulus or situations with a fear response. For example, for a traumatic response in DID, that can lead to the development of a distinct dissociative part or alter, like I explained earlier. The amygdala's involvement in fear conditioning suggests that it may play a role in the formation and maintenance of dissociative responses to trauma. So basically, the triggers, what triggers these alters, what triggers the fragmentation of the personality, that's where the amygdala comes into play. And altered activation and connectivity. Neuroimaging studies have shown that individuals with DID may exhibit altered activation patterns and connectivity in brain regions, including the amygdala. For example, some studies have found increased amygdala activation in response to trauma-related stimuli, suggesting heightened emotional reactivity. And that kind of, makes sense when you think of a trauma, excessive trauma, and the body's natural response to trauma. And then you think of repeated trauma and how that affects a person's normal levels of anxiety and response, and fear stimulus and reactions to different situations. For somebody who has been through abuse, through violence, or traumatic events, their reactivity to normal stimuli would be so much different to other people, because their anxiety level, their perception of a situation would be way different from somebody who has not been through the same experiences, if that makes sense. Well, it is also important to mention that these researches are still kind of underway, and there's no definitive conclusions that we have yet because of the complexity of the disease itself. But the role of amygdala is still kind of being researched, and hopefully we'll find more answers as time goes on and there's more research done, and there will be a better understanding of the role of amygdala and other brain regions in DID in the future. So now I'm going to talk about the treatment modalities that are used for treating DID. And the theoretical perspectives inform the development and implementation of treatment approaches for DID. And these include long-term psychotherapy, such as psychodynamic therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, trauma-focused therapies, and integrative approaches that address both the dissociative symptoms and the underlying trauma. The therapist provides a safe and supportive environment, forming a trusting relationship that allows the exploration of the traumatic experiences and the underlying dynamics contributing to the disorder. The basic goal of therapy is to form cohesion between these fragments, like I said before. And there are different techniques used. There is CBT, and what needs to be emphasized here is the fact that this is not something that happens overnight. With a lot of mental health disorders, the problem is adherence to treatment, which is a huge challenge. Because let's talk about anxiety, for instance. You might have anxiety and you're taking medications for it, and on a normal day basis you don't feel anxious all that much, but when you do, it is so paralyzing that you can't focus, you can't do anything, and you can't even muster the courage to get out of bed. And even though you have the diagnosis, you have the medications, sometimes you just cannot muster the courage to get out of bed and take that medication, which you ultimately know is going to make you feel better. But in that moment, actively, you just can't find it in yourself to step out and take that medication. And same as with schizophrenia and with other, especially hard for dissociative disorders, because for one, there's a whole process of denial and acceptance for patients, where a lot of times when these patients start experiencing these symptoms, they are in denial and they don't want to get treated or reach out, because they just keep thinking, oh, it's all in my head. I mean, they're confused and they're scared, but they don't know how to go about this. And a lot of times that is why it takes such a long time for these disorders to be diagnosed and for therapy to start and for proper treatments to start. And for DID, similarly, is the case where sometimes the patients might not even be aware. And I've read of a case where somebody found out that they had DID when they were like 75 years old, and they had all these symptoms, but they always kind of let them slide because they were not that bad, or they were not interfering with their daily life so much that they felt like, oh, they needed to get them checked out or whatever. They were not aware of it because there is amnesic barriers involved in DID. So a lot of times when one alter may be fronting, they've taken control of the body, the others might not be aware of what they're doing, where they are. And that is why sometimes patients would come up, tell the therapist that they have memory gaps. They don't remember where they were, what they were doing, what they were wearing. Sometimes when they come back to when they come around and they realize that they're not in a place that is familiar to them, they're not wearing what they were supposed to, they're not with people that they know, stuff like that. And it can be very scary to think, imagine just to wake up one day and you're in a nightclub, passed out on the floor, wearing your sister's clothes or something, and you've dyed your hair black all of a sudden, and you're like, what the hell happened? And it sounds fantastical, like I said, but this is the reality for these people. And it can be very jarring. It can be very scary to think of that you have no idea, you have no control over your body. So the main goal is for the patients to realize and to be aware of their condition and to accept it for what it is. To put it simply, these treatments are going to take a lot of times with dissociative identity disorder, there is supposed to be, the main goal is to, form cohesion between these fragmentations, these alters, and, find a middle ground where you can treat, their traumas, whatever part of the trauma that they are withholding, and slowly integrate them into a more cohesive sense of self for the patient themselves. And it can take ages, it can take years before a person even, figures out, is made aware of the alters, or can come to terms with these alters and stuff like that. So to expect that, you're going to start taking medication and, oh, you're going to be okay the next day, is actually very counterproductive. And that idea itself can be very harming to these patients when you make them think like that, or when they think of it like that. So that can be a huge problem for the treatment, perspective of it, because you have to adhere to a certain, regimen of treatment, and it can be hard, definitely hard. But nowadays we have better facilities, we have better doctor teams, like you have a group of people, individuals, professionals who are trained to deal with these things. And I'm glad that there have been better sort of developments regarding the treatments of mental health disorders, so that patients can feel more at ease, and feel more safe, and have a regular, sort of like a regulated regimen where there's check and balance and there's adherence. Okay, lastly, I'm going to be debunking some myths and misconceptions about DID. And it's important to foster a more accurate understanding of the disorder, for us to be aware, to be able to spread awareness, and to be able to support people around us who may have this diagnosis, right? So the first myth: DID is not a real disorder, it is made up or faked. Fact: DID is recognized and documented mental health disorder in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as DSM-5. It is supported by extensive research and clinical evidence. Individuals with DID are not faking their symptoms, but are genuinely experiencing identity fragmentation and dissociative states. Myth number 2: people with DID are dangerous or violent. Fact: individuals with DID are more likely to harm themselves than others. They're not inherently dangerous or violent due to their diagnosis. Media portrayals have often sensationalized and inaccurately depicted individuals with DID as dangerous, perpetuating this as a myth. The third myth: everyone has multiple personalities or alters. Fact: having multiple personalities or alters is not a common experience. DID is a relatively rare disorder, and the presence of distinct identities or alters is a specific symptom that distinguishes it from other mental health conditions. Another myth: DID is caused by imagination or suggestibility. My God. Fact: DID is primarily a result of severe and chronic trauma, particularly during childhood. It is not caused by imagination, suggestion, or role playing. The disorder stems from the mind's protective response to overwhelming experiences. And I cannot repeat that enough. Oh my God. Myth: therapy for DID involves merging or eliminating identities. Fact: therapy for DID aims to promote communication, cooperation, and eventual integration among dissociative parts, but it does not involve forced merging or elimination of identities. Integration is a collaborative process that supports individuals in developing a cohesive sense of self and improving daily functioning. Myth: individuals with DID are aware of all their alters and can switch at will. Fact: awareness of alters can vary among individuals with DID. Some may have limited awareness of their dissociative parts, while others may have more co-consciousness or amnesia between alters. Switching between alters is typically involuntary and triggered by internal or external factors, not under conscious control. Myth: people with DID cannot lead fulfilling lives or maintain relationships. Fact: with proper support and treatment, individuals with DID can lead fulfilling lives and maintain healthy relationships. Therapy, including trauma focused approaches and integration work, can help individuals manage symptoms, improve functioning, and enhance their quality of life. Now, challenging these myths is crucial for promoting understanding, empathy, and support for individuals with DID. Education and awareness can help combat stigma and provide accurate information about the disorder, and it is imperative that we all make active efforts to debunk these myths and to actively, practice being more empathetic and being more supportive of people who have mental disorders, be it DID or any other mental disorder, because it's a person suffering in silence. It's something not physical. And so we need to realize that it probably hurts more, right? So, with that, I'm going to conclude this episode here. And final thoughts. What are my final thoughts? I mean, I tried to include everything that I know about DID, but obviously I was not able to include literally everything. But I hope that this made sense, and I hope that it was informative for you and you found something useful to learn from this. And like I said, I'm not a professional trained individual to treat this disorder. So if you think that you might need more help or professional opinions about something, please reach out to a professional that is specialized in these things, and they would probably help you better. This was a kind of overview from a med student's point of view, somebody who is fascinated and very much intrigued by the brain and how it works and what can happen to it when it is injured or otherwise compromised. And I hope that this has been useful in whatever way, shape, or form. And I hope that the information that I've given is not misleading. I mean, obviously, I can't take credit for everything because it's researched by other people, but I try to make sense of it and try to give my opinions on what I think of these researches. And if you have different opinions, please let me know. I would like to know what you think, and if you have any more tidbits or facts or myths you want to debunk, please reach out. You can DM me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is myintrusive.thoughts, and I am not very active on there, but I'm trying to be more active. It's a whole mess. But anyways, with that said, I am going to now take my leave and see you next Friday. Allah Hafiz.